In the relentless downpour of a September afternoon in New York City, rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 54th floor at Lancaster Holdings, turning the world outside into a blurred gray haze. The conference room was a fortress of polished walnut and sleek minimalism, the long table dominating the space like a silent judge. Claire Donovan, 27 years old, sat rigidly at one end, her face bare of makeup, her outdated office attire clinging uncomfortably to her frame. In her lap, she clutched a worn leather portfolio containing copies of her father's hospital bills, $186,000, a staggering sum that her years of waitressing shifts and side gigs could never cover. Her father lay in a sterile ICU bed uptown, battling late-stage cancer each day, a ticking clock toward an unbearable loss. Claire stared at the rain-streaked glass, her mind a whirlwind of desperation. She had sold her few possessions, worked double shifts until her feet blistered, but it wasn't enough. This meeting was her last resort, a gamble born of sheer necessity. The door swung open without warning. Julian Lancaster, 36, entered with the precision of a man who owned the room and the building. Tall and imposing with sharp features, dark hair neatly combed, and eyes like polished obsidian. He was the enigmatic CEO of Lancaster Holdings, known on Wall Street for his ruthless efficiency and impenetrable privacy. He didn't greet her or offer a handshake. He simply took the seat across from her and flipped open the folder in front of him. "Have you reviewed the terms thoroughly?" he asked, his voice devoid of warmth, as if discussing a routine merger. Claire nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, I have. I agree to all of them." He scanned the document briefly. No emotional involvement, no legal entanglements beyond 12 months, no asset division, no disclosures to the media or any third parties. "You'll attend required social events as my wife, and in return I'll cover your father's medical expenses in full, plus a monthly stipend for your needs." "Agreed," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily, "as long as my father gets the treatment he needs." Julian signed without hesitation, his pen gliding across the page in a fluid, commanding stroke. Claire followed suit, her hand steady despite the storm inside her. The ceremony that afternoon was perfunctory, held in a nondescript law office downtown. 7 minutes total, with 2 witnesses and a judge who barely looked up from his paperwork. No rings, no vows of love, just signatures sealing a transaction. By evening, Claire had moved into Julian's penthouse atop a gleaming midtown tower. The space was vast and impersonal, marble floors reflecting golden light from recessed fixtures, modern art on white walls, but no personal touches, no family photos, no lived-in warmth. "I won't interfere with your life," Claire said as she paused at the door to her assigned guest suite. Julian nodded, already turning back to his laptop screen. "Don't exceed your role. In 12 months we'll part ways amicably." She closed the door behind her, sinking onto the unfamiliar bed as rain continued to pelt the windows. In the silence, Claire wondered if she'd sold her soul for survival. Julian, alone in the living room, poured himself a scotch and stared at the city lights below. He didn't anticipate that this calculated arrangement would crack open the one thing his wealth and power couldn't buy: genuine kindness from someone like Claire, a force that would challenge the walls he'd built around his heart since losing his mother young and enduring his father's relentless expectations. 3 months had slipped by in a rhythm of calculated distance and quiet routines within the penthouse. Claire had adapted to her role with mechanical precision, attending a handful of corporate galas on Julian's arm, smiling politely at investors and retreating to her suite each night. She visited her father daily at the hospital, where the bills were now paid without question, his treatments progressing under the best care money could buy. Julian remained an enigma, polite but detached, his days consumed by board meetings and market analyses, his evenings spent alone in his study. They shared meals occasionally, exchanging superficial conversation about the weather or news headlines, but nothing deeper. Claire told herself it was fine. This was a transaction, not a life. As Christmas Eve descended, the city below twinkled with festive lights, but the penthouse felt like a gilded cage. The enormous fir tree in the living room stood impeccably decorated by a professional service silver ornaments, glinting under recessed lighting garlands draped with mathematical symmetry. But it lacked any warmth, no stockings hung, no personal trinkets. Claire stood beside it, her fingers tracing the edge of a small box wrapped in plain brown paper from a corner drugstore tied with a simple red ribbon. She had spent a week scouring online listings for this gift, driven by a fleeting moment Julian had shared during one of their rare late-night talks, a childhood memory of his mother giving him a wooden toy boat, lost during one of the family's many relocations after her death. Julian emerged from his study, ending a conference call with his usual clipped command: "Finalize the acquisition by Monday. No delays." He loosened his tie, his posture as rigid as ever, until his eyes landed on Claire and the box in her hands. "What's that?" She swallowed, stepping forward. "A Christmas gift." His brow furrowed slightly. "The contract doesn't include provisions for gifts." "I know," she said softly, her voice steady despite the nerves. "But sometimes a small gesture doesn't breach an agreement, it just reminds us that we're still human." He regarded her for a moment, then extended his hand. "Give it here." Claire placed the box in his palm, her heart pounding as if she'd overstepped an invisible line. Julian unwrapped it methodically, peeling back the paper to reveal the small wooden boat inside, faded paint-chipped edges, but unmistakably similar to the one he'd described. He froze his fingers, tracing the weathered hull. For the first time since she'd met him, Claire saw a crack in his armor. His hand trembled faintly, his breath catching. "How did you remember?" he asked, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. "Because of the way you looked when you mentioned it," she explained gently. It wasn't the look of a CEO. It was the look of a boy who lost his mother. Silence stretched between them, thick and charged. Julian closed the box carefully, his expression hardening once more. "Don't do this again," he said, his tone reverting to its familiar steel. "You have no right to access those memories." Claire lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to—" "No," he interrupted, turning away. But as he walked toward his study, he paused at the doorway and murmured almost inaudibly, "But thank you." The words hung in the air like a fragile ornament. Claire stood there, her hands still trembling as the door clicked shut behind him. That Christmas night the penthouse felt a fraction less cold, the small gift awakening a buried part of Julian he thought long gone. In the days that followed, subtle shifts appeared. He inquired about her father's progress during dinner, arranged for flowers to be sent to the hospital room, small acts that hinted at a thawing beneath his icy exterior. Claire noticed but said nothing, wondering if this was the start of something beyond their contract or just another illusion. 3 months had passed in a carefully orchestrated routine within the confines of Julian's penthouse, a space that felt more like a high-end hotel suite than a home. Claire had settled into her role with quiet efficiency, attending the occasional corporate dinner or charity gala on his arm, exchanging polite small talk with influential guests, and retreating to her private quarters afterward. She spent her days visiting her father at the hospital, where the treatments were progressing steadily, now that the bills were covered without question. Julian remained as enigmatic as ever, courteous in passing, but absorbed in his work, his schedule a relentless cycle of meetings and market reports. They shared the occasional dinner, discussing neutral topics like current events or the weather, but nothing that breached the invisible barriers of their agreement. Claire reminded herself daily that this was temporary, a means to an end, not a life to invest in emotionally. As Christmas Eve enveloped the city in a glittering frost, the penthouse was adorned with impeccable holiday decor, arranged by a professional team, a towering fir tree laden with silver baubles and twinkling lights, wreaths of evergreen on the mantel, and garlands draping the marble staircase. Yet the space felt sterile, like a showroom, designed for admiration rather than warmth. No handmade ornaments, no scent of baked goods, just the faint hum of the city below. Claire stood beside the tree, her fingers absently tracing the edge of a small box wrapped in plain brown paper from a nearby pharmacy secured with a simple red ribbon. She had spent a week searching for this gift, driven by a rare moment of vulnerability Julian had shared during one of their sparse late-night conversations, a childhood story about a wooden toy boat his mother had given him, lost in the chaos of relocations after her death, when he was just a boy. Julian emerged from his study, ending a conference call with his signature curt directive: "Lock it in for Monday, no excuses." He adjusted his cufflinks, his posture as unyielding as ever, until his gaze fell on Claire and the box in her hands. "What's that?" She swallowed, stepping forward hesitantly. "A Christmas gift." His expression tightened slightly. "The contract doesn't stipulate gifts." "I know," she replied softly, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "But sometimes a small gesture doesn't violate the terms, it just reminds us that we're still human." He regarded her for a long moment, then extended his hand. Handed over, Claire placed the box in his palm, her heart racing as if she'd crossed an unspoken line. Julian unwrapped it methodically, folding back the paper to reveal the small wooden boat inside, faded paint-chipped edges, but unmistakably reminiscent of the one he'd described. He went still, his fingers brushing over the weathered hull. For the first time since she'd known him, Claire saw a flicker of raw emotion. His hand trembled faintly, his breath hitching almost imperceptibly. "How did you remember?" he asked, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard, laced with something vulnerable. "Because of the look in your eyes when you mentioned it," she explained gently. It wasn't the expression of a CEO. It was the face of a boy who'd lost his mother. Silence blanketed the room, heavy and electric. Julian closed the box with deliberate care, his features recomposing into their familiar mask. "Don't do this again," he said, his tone reverting to its cool authority. "You have no right to delve into those memories." Claire lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to—" "No." He cut her off, turning away. But as he headed toward his study, he paused at the threshold and murmured almost too softly to hear, "But thank you." The words lingered in the air like a fragile snowflake. Claire stood there, her hands still trembling as the door clicked shut. That Christmas night, the penthouse felt a fraction less empty, the small gift stirring a dormant part of Julian he had long buried under layers of control and ambition. In the following days, subtle changes emerged. He inquired about her father's condition over breakfast, arranged for a bouquet to be delivered to the hospital room. Small acts that hinted at a softening beneath his armored exterior. Claire noticed but kept her distance, unsure if this was a crack in the facade or just another layer of their intricate arrangement. On January 3rd, the new year had barely begun, but the chill in the air felt sharper than the holiday frost. Claire emerged from her morning yoga class in an upscale midtown studio. Her muscles relaxed, but her mind still tangled in the subtle shifts she'd noticed in Julian since Christmas. As she stepped into the lobby, wiping sweat from her brow, the building's security guard approached her with a folded tabloid newspaper in hand. "Mrs. Lancaster, this was left at the front desk for you." He said, his tone neutral, but his eyes avoiding hers. Claire took it, unfolding the front page to a headline that hit like a gut punch. "Julian Lancaster's new wife, a marriage of convenience or contract." Her face paled as she scanned the article, the words blurring under the fluorescent lights. It cited anonymous sources within Lancaster Holdings, claiming their union was a sham designed to mask financial irregularities at the company. Details mirrored their private agreement eerily, the 12-month term. The no emotions clause, even a twisted mention of her past as a bartender, spun as a calculated ploy by Julian to appear more relatable amid shareholder unrest. The piece dripped with insinuation, painting her as a gold digger and him as a puppet master desperate to maintain his empire's facade. Claire's hands shook. This wasn't just gossip, it was a deliberate sabotage laced with truths only someone close could know. She rushed back to the penthouse, the newspaper crumpled in her fist, her heart racing with a mix of fear and betrayal. Julian was already there, pacing the living room like a caged lion, stacks of papers scattered across the coffee table, printouts of the same article, emails from his PR team, and furious notes scribbled in the margins. His usually impeccable suit was rumpled tie askew, and when he saw her, his eyes narrowed. "Who did you talk to?" he demanded, his voice a blade of controlled fury. "No one," Claire shot back, stepping back instinctively. "I haven't breathed a word to anyone, not your staff, not even my father. How could I've been playing by your rules from day one." "Then explain how this matches our contract verbatim." He pressed, snatching a copy from the table and thrusting it toward her. "The timeline, the stipulations, even the clause about no emotional attachments. She must not fall in love with me." Who else could know that? Claire's throat tightened, the accusation stinging like salt in a wound. Because I thought that way at first, but that doesn't mean I leaked it. Julian turned away, his shoulders tense, a faint tremor in his hands betraying the crack in his composure. We'll hold a press conference tomorrow. You'll deny everything, say it's fabricated, a smear campaign by competitors. If you don't, I'll terminate the agreement immediately. Your father's care ends with it. She stared at him, the room spinning slightly. You'll throw everything away over a headline. What about what we've shared, the talks, the moments? You're more concerned with your reputation than admitting any of this might be real. His silence was deafening, his eyes a fortress of unreadable steel. That night, as Julian buried himself in damage control calls, Claire slipped into his study. She placed the wooden boat gift from Christmas on his desk alongside a handwritten note. I once thought I was just a clause in your plan, but you became the chapter where I found myself. If this is all fake, I'd rather face the painful truth than live as a shadow. The next morning, she packed a small bag and left the penthouse without a word, the door closing behind her with finality. No goodbyes, no negotiations, just the echo of her footsteps in the empty hallway. Julian stood alone in the vast emptiness of the penthouse, the city lights below, a distant blur through the rain-smeared windows. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint tick of a wall clock in the hallway. On his desk lay the small wooden boat, its chipped edges catching the dim glow from his lamp, the gift Claire had given him on Christmas Eve, now accompanied by her note, its words etched into his mind like a scar. I once thought I was just a clause in your plan, but you became the chapter where I found myself. If this is all fake, I'd rather face the painful truth than live as a shadow. For the first time in his life, Julian Lancaster, the man who had bent markets to his will, who had built an empire from the ashes of his father's legacy, felt utterly powerless. Money could buy hospitals, silence scandals, but it couldn't mend the void she'd left, couldn't summon her back through sheer force of will. He picked up the boat, turning it over in his hands, memories flooding in unbidden, his mother's gentle smile as she handed him the original on a long-ago birthday before illness claimed her, and his father drowned grief in ambition. Claire had unearthed that piece of him not with demands or calculations, but with quiet understanding, and now she was gone. Julian set the boat down and reached for his phone, dialing his assistant. Find Claire Donovan, by any means necessary. I need her location now. 3 days blurred into a frenzy of futile searches and ignored calls. His PR team scrambled to contain the tabloid fallout, but Julian barely registered their updates, his focus singular. Finally, a report came. She had rented a modest apartment in Brooklyn, a far cry from the penthouse's luxury. He drove there himself, dismissing his driver, the rain soaking his coat as he climbed the worn stairs to her door. He knocked, but there was no answer, only a faint rustle from inside. Claire. He called through the wood, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. Please open the door. A pause, then her voice cold and resolute. Don't turn this into another negotiation, Julian. I've given up the name Mrs. Lancaster. What more do you want? He leaned his forehead against the door, the weight of her words pressing on him. I want to talk, face to face. Go away, she replied, but there was a crack in her tone, a hint of the pain mirroring his own. Julian slid an envelope under the door, a thick packet of documents sealed and notarized. This is for you. Read it, please. Silence stretched, then the sound of paper rustling. He waited, rain dripping from his hair, until her voice came again, softer. What is this? My resignation as chairman and CEO of Lancaster Holdings, he said, effective immediately, and the annulment papers for our contract dissolve, no strings attached. You once said you didn't need me to choose you because of an agreement, so today I'm choosing you. With my freedom. The door remained closed, but he heard her footsteps recede, then return. Finally, it creaked open. Claire stood there, the envelope in her hands, her eyes red-rimmed but fierce. Why? She whispered, her voice breaking. Why now? Because you're right. He admitted, stepping just inside the threshold as rain puddled at his feet. I've hidden behind contracts and control my whole life, but you saw through it. You gave me back a piece of myself I thought was lost forever. I can't buy that, Claire. and I won't let it go." She clutched the papers, tears spilling over. "And the company, your legacy?" He shook his head. "If losing it means gaining you, it's worth it." The next day, financial headlines exploded. Julian Lancaster steps down abruptly from Lancaster Holdings to pursue what matters more than power. But the business world buzzed with speculation, rival takeovers, hidden scandals, but Julian ignored it all, retreating to a quiet hotel upstate. Claire, alone in a small cafe near her apartment, read the reports on her phone, her coffee growing cold. At the end of his public statement, a line stood out. "If I lose the company for one person, at least, I know she's the only one who's ever helped me find myself again." Julian Lancaster. Tears streamed down her face as the truth sank in, not just his sacrifice, but the depth of what they'd built beyond any contract. 3 months later, the crisp air of early spring carried a hint of renewal through the streets of New York, but for Claire it felt like the first breath after a long submersion. Her debut novel, Manuscripts in Silence, Ye Trailed, had become an unexpected sensation, a poignant tale of a woman who signs a marriage contract with a loveless man only to discover self-worth and teach him vulnerability. The launch event was held in a cozy independent bookstore in Greenwich Village, its shelves lined with well-worn tomes and the air scented with fresh coffee and aged paper. Claire stood at the signing table, pen in hand, as readers approached with kind words and copies clutched like treasures. She had poured her soul into the book, drawing from the raw edges of her own story without naming names, transforming pain into prose that resonated with strangers. As she inscribed the final copy for an eager fan, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Claire looked up, her heart skipping a beat. Julian stood at the back of the room, unassuming, in a simple button-down shirt and jeans. No entourage, no designer labels, just a man with weary eyes and a small box in his hands. He hadn't contacted her since that rainy night at her apartment door, respecting the space she'd demanded, even as headlines swirled about his resignation. The business world had buzzed with speculation, rival firms circling Lancaster Holdings like vultures. But Julian had vanished from the spotlight, rumors whispering of a quiet retreat upstate. He approached slowly as the event wrapped up, the bookstore owner dimming the lights for closing. Claire's hands trembled slightly as she set down her pen. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice a mix of surprise and guarded hope. "I couldn't miss this," he replied softly, placing the box on the table between them. "Your words, they've always seen through me. I had to see you bring them to life." She eyed the box warily, then lifted the lid. Inside rested a wooden boat identical to the one she'd gifted him at Christmas, but this time plated in silver, its surface gleaming under the warm bookstore lamps. Etched along the hull in delicate script were the words, "No more clauses, just choices, every day I choose to stay." Tears welled in Claire's eyes, spilling over as she traced the inscription. "Julian." He stepped closer, his voice low and earnest. "I let the company go because it was never mine. It was my father's shadow, a cage I built around myself after losing my mother. But you showed me there's more to life than control and contracts. You gave me back pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. I don't need boardrooms or billions if it means losing the one person who makes me feel truly alive." The bookstore had emptied, leaving them in a cocoon of quiet shelves and soft lighting. Claire closed the box gently, her resolve cracking. "And what about us? Was any of it real or just another arrangement?" "All of it," he said, taking her hand. "From the moment you walked into that conference room, you challenged everything I knew. I was the opening chapter, but you're the story I want to write every day. No terms, no end date, just us choosing each other." She searched his eyes, finding the vulnerability she'd glimpsed in fleeting moments, the boy behind the CEO, the man who'd whispered "thank you" on Christmas Eve. Tears streamed down her face as she pulled him into an embrace, the crowd long gone, no applause needed. In that quiet space, surrounded by stories of others' lives, they forged the beginning of their own unscripted Unbound. A contract might buy time, but it can't purchase sincerity. A small gift can shift a heart. And true love requires no stipulations, just the courage to choose one another day after day from the start.